First, thank you very much, Yalong, for the help on this project. I think that thanks to you, I was able to, let's say, much more understand not only what we are doing, at Meaningful and why actually it's working, but also what is maybe one of the key issues regarding, let's say, perception of a complex system. And you see it actually on the title, thanks to you, I shift from, the data visualization for digital twins to information visualization. Even though, of course, in some cases, it's a synonym. So it's both are used for the same reality, but I think this is a very important difference between the two. I've chosen this image. It's a real, it's one of our clients actually image. It's a picture from a factory, and you see for me what is at stake. On the background, you see a factory. Now it's a champagne factory, and on the foreground, you see the process that is actually happening on that factory, and you can definitely see that. If we can talk about digital twin, we should talk about an information abstraction of a factory, which is exactly the case here. It's only a matter of information. It's only a matter of process. And of course, it's completely, let's say, it's a twin, but it's not a duplication. It's another point of view of a physical asset or a physical complex asset, I should say. So you know me a little bit, but I will just reintroduce myself on just one part. Generally, here I use a picture, where there is a famous quote from designers that says that design will save the world just after rock and roll does. And because I am a musician and a rocker one, it fits well, because I do both actually, and I want to save the world. But here, regarding that information thing, I would say, or concept, I've changed it because here you see, a picture from a university library. And in those libraries, you have the decimal classification or the classification, in front of each rows. And it's one of my first memory as a human. Actually, I literally wake up in this world by seeing this. So maybe it explains why I have such, let's say, a good feeling with information architecture and information structure, actually. And you will see how. So finally, everything is completely consistent. Let's start from the starting point. So it's not something that I shared with you, but also with other researchers. I show you some the kind of work that we actually did that actually works, meaning that it's in production. That's okay. That's let's say everything is fine about. And one of the surprises I had, not only with you but also with the other researcher, is the fact that actually what we are doing as a day-to-day operation in terms of designers is very, very interesting in terms of research, because it tackles a lot of, let's say, problems that researchers in the field of HCI or computing are trying to solve. And actually, I just found today a research program in France that is exactly doing that. But the surprise is not that, is that we are far more advanced in terms of delivery than the most of researchers. So thanks to you to have to share that feedback. What we learn is not only to let's say to design that kind of HMI or interfaces, but also we begin to have an overview about how, let's say it's also matter of maturity. Information is also a matter of maturity, and digital twin is also a matter of maturity. And what we learn is that, when I'm talking much more on the industrial side, from the client side. And actually today, everybody is stuck in the equipment, let's say, realm or area. You have a machine, you have SCADAs, you have PLCs, you have you have data from your machine, and you're somehow able to operate it. But when we are talking about digital twins, this complete abstraction, it needs a huge shift in terms of concept. And this is why, there is this shift is here. It's like the first step of the stairway. And you need to, let's say, have a different point of view regarding a lot of things, actually. Not only what is information and what is your, let's say, information architecture in your factory, but also what you could tackle with information. What is what are we talking about? And the first thing that we understood is the fact that the first information that needs to be contextualized with the data of the equipment is the information of the process. Which process is at stake? And of course, it's a matter of context, global context. The first context is who is operating, but what is trying to achieve, what is and how the process on what part and on the other part, everything related to production, traceability, and so on. This is the first step. Then you have a second step, always in terms of information, is the procedures aspect. You may know what the process is, but how to explain that procedures, how to explain what to do is a different aspect, and it is also information. It's and we tend toward knowledge in that case. We are dealing with how to convey the knowledge of operating or doing a certain process, and then with that, once you have all those information and also other information from, for example, supply chain or ERPs or that kind of stuff, IT information if you want, and maybe outside information like humidity, moisture, that kind of, climate, that kind of stuff, then you may be able to optimize, your production because you have sufficient, let's say, information in order to put and structured, very important, enough information and also structured, which basically structured data is information. You cannot have an information that is not structured. I think in that case, we are talking about data and raw data. And then in that case, you may think about putting this structured data or information into IA, and then you may have a positive output in terms of recommendation, good recommendation, and so on. And I will give you at the end of this presentation some example on how to make it alive or real, in factories. At some point, because you have a complete abstraction, you may abstract every component of your assets. And when I say assets, it's much more computer assets, and in that regard, PLCs could be also abstract. PLCs programs could be abstract through behavioral analysis. And it could be a huge gain because today, when you are installing a new factory, generally for every machine, you may have several PLCs, but at some point you won't have any tools to handle properly those programs of PLCs. You program it, it stays as it is, and you don't touch it. It's almost like if it was hardware, actually. It's not the case. It's still software. So the problems that I've been asked by one of my clients is, okay, you are able to do that, We are very pleased with it. We have an idea on how to operate complex systems, but we still have the problem of how to convince everybody in the organization to take the decision of building such digital twin. It's very today, especially in industry, some people may need a digital twin, but it's much more for their career, or it's much more because it's hype, But if we are talking about the why, and the decision to take it, a lot of people are, let's say, because they don't understand the why, or they don't get exactly what we are talking about when we are talking about technology, to put it simply. It's very hard for them to take the decision, to go for it. And it's not only about money. It's also about giving its data, giving its access, make its people involved and so on. And it's a very, very key aspect of the reality of, the digitalization today. So the question was, what could the design help, not only to help designing interfaces for operator, but could the design help all the value chain, every people involved in the digital twin process, globally in the factory, to help them take the decision on that, to better understand what we are talking about and so on. And here I had a problem. When I'm building that kind of stuff, I know what semantics in terms of design use. I have curves, I have dashboards, I have numbers, I have a lot of things. I have interaction. I've got a huge semantic. But to represent literally the complexity of the system, here I don't represent the complexity. Here I give a dashboard, like a wheel, a steering wheel with some key elements in order to drive. It's not about getting all the complexity. So I haven't the semantics in terms of design. So this is why I interviewed you and some other researchers in order to figure out, okay, is there any representation tool or concept that we may use in order to tackle this complexity? And this complexity has three, let's say, pillars for me, representing the diversity in the nature of data, data that is real-time versus data that is much more processed data, that is generally stored in relational database, and graph and graph database, which are completely different type of data, actually. And today, the representation are not very, let's say, we don't have a common tool, in a single interface in order to represent those three types of data. Of course, we need also to tackle the scale, because the scale in geography is a huge concept. At each change of scale, you may need to change the representation, the type of representation, the type of information. So it's very powerful in terms of a concept when you are tackling a complex system. And of course, representing data and data flows. So data in let's say, data structure or architecture and data flows. Like I said, because I didn't have any, I thought I attained the limit of designer semantics. I asked people from computer science. So I asked four people, you, of course, Arnaud, that you know. David Bianic, who I don't know if you know him, is much more a researcher in the aesthetic realm. He's a researcher in France, and he works also as an artist. So it's also interesting to have, let's say, a more artistic feel and point of view on that regard. And Mark, I don't know if you know Mark, but Mark is a very close friend of Arnaud. Actually, it's thanks Mark, that I was able to meet you and Arnaud. Mark is the lead principal of the IFT, which is the Institute for Future Technology. It's based in Paris. It's a new institution. And Mark is a former student from the MIT, from the Media Lab. And his idea is to, let's say, try to do something close, actually, to that in France. And he's also a researcher. He comes from design, so it is through him that I was able to explore those subjects. I've got a first bibliography here. It's a first version. It was much more a test, but I will complete it during time. This bibliography is on a Google slide. Of course, I will share it with you. And of course, it will be updated regularly, at least in the bibliography aspect. So what I found with those interviews, my conclusion, maybe first, the real starting point of my clients, but I think it's true for a lot of clients, when they are trying to build complex systems like digital twin, they are trying to build an informational abstraction of their own complex system, which is a physical complex system. And generally, they ask consultants, and those consultants, they make diagrams, that kind of diagrams. The problem is those diagrams are not structured at all. There is no semantics. At least there is a semantic inside the diagram, but there is no structured semantics outside. That means that this reality is true only for this slide. If you change slide, you will see another semantic. So at the end, nobody is able to take a decision because the reality is always changing. This is just a point of view. And everything is mixed. Like I said, there is a mix between software, between equipment, between flows, between tools, between needs. Everything is completely mixed up. So at the same level. So of course, nobody can, it seems complex, but it's for me, let's say my lecture on it is logical that it seems complex because it's not readable, it's not understandable, because it's not structured, because it has no semantics. It's like a painting of abstract painting. Okay, you throw something on the wall and you say, okay, this is structure. No, this is not. So thanks to David Bianic, I don't know if you have heard of Jacques Bertin, I imagine so, but I rediscovered Jacques Bertin and it's very, very interesting and powerful. I study geography in my early years, and unfortunately, everybody in geography was using Jacques Bertin, but nobody was able to say that they were using Jacques Bertin. So I never heard about it. I use his work, but I never took, let's say, conscious that he even exists. It's very good, but it doesn't tackle what I need to tackle. Meaning, okay, it's 2Ds first, it's print generally, and it's not interactive, and it's not about complexity. It's very elegant. There is a huge density of information, which is great, like in the case of Edward Tufte, for example, but it's not about complexity. I will, after, try to explain what I mean by complexity, because I think there is a huge, let's say, topic on the definition on what we mean by complexity. And thanks to you, I discovered Tamara Munzner, so I read her book. Not every page, but I think she did a tremendous work. It's very, very, very powerful. For me, it's the new Jacques Bertin and the new Tufte. It's a huge work, absolutely. I just took that example as for me as a limitation. I think that we can definitely build a lot of things based on their work, but at some point there is something that, for me as a designer, is problematic. I took this schema, and you have a good idea of what is the limitation of it. Is that at some point, let's say the cognitive aspect of things is to make a relationship between objects, and in order to understand whatever, we need to make connection. It's very conceptual, and here, if you start from representing data, which is the case here, in a lot of different, let's say, area or realm, or even software, at some point you will need to make some connections, and you may arrive to that, which is literally linking area upon the software. For me as a designer, it's not, let's say, very. I think something got wrong, in the process of thinking. It cannot be the case. It cannot be that. For me, the problem is still there because of a simple thing. Only the people that make those links may use that software or use that data to take decision, but still we don't have the information. We don't see it. We may see some link, and it's not elegant in terms of software. Other type of representation, because it was kind of a state of art. That's something that you know very well. Graph database, where here it's relatively simple, but in some case here the graph might be very complex. But for me, I've got two problems with it. Is that first, it works only at a certain level of information. Here, if you have too much nodes, you won't see anything. So you will need to drill down, to zoom in, zoom out, and it won't give so much information actually. But for me, the real problem is that it gives, even with that, even if there is a lot of nodes, you see simple relation between every component, and it may give you the false idea that complexity is about that. But the real complexity of a graph database is this column, is all the attributes, and all those attributes for each node are shared with other nodes. And here you have the multidimensional aspect of things, which is absolutely not represented here. You have a main navigation, I would say, by node, and then you have multidimensionality that is not at all represented and that you cannot actually tackle. So two problems for me. The multidimensional aspect is not represented, and you give a false sense of simplicity because of the nodes, which actually is not, for me, very well in terms of representing data. Of course, at some point, you may have a basic command line request on database. It's just, here, just an example. It can be whatever tool, which actually is the state of art. When you are a data scientist or researcher, okay, you have a command line, you make requests on database. This is how basically you interact with a complex system, and this is the interface. So here the interface is saying nothing about complexity. It's just saying that, okay, everything is all the comprehension is on your mind, and certainly not in the software. Again, thanks to Tamara, I went back to this paper. I imagine you knew this paper is very famous, Yalong. This research paper, you know it? You don't know it. Tamara is citing this paper in his introduction. And it's very funny because I read this. I tried to read this paper like 20 years ago, and I tried to read it, and I didn't get anything. I didn't even get what was the point. With your, when I read your work and your paper you gave me, and your thesis and the work of Arnaud, I began to let's say read research paper. And at some point, because I was reading Tamara Menzner, then this paper went back. So I said, oh, I know this paper, so I will try to reread it. And it was very funny because this time I get it. I get the point. So it was very funny, very interesting paper, especially because it's not only about the title and the proof, the demonstration of the title, which is still very interesting, very interesting, and it's very scientific, no problem. It's a mathematical demonstration. Which is always good when we do science. When you have mathematical demonstration, it's better, even though I'm not a mathematician. But what was interesting here is that one of the key reasons why a diagram is sometimes worth 10,000 words is the spatialization of information. Something that exactly, you have here. This is exactly that, the spatialization, because on the same space you have different, and I would say, representation, and they are close, it makes sense. So it's also a part of the reason why a diagram is sometimes worth 10,000 words. And for me, it was very interesting because it explained why this representation, these tools that we are building, actually works very well because of the same reason, because we take very different point of view and we put it next to each other, and we take information and we put it next to each other. This simple thing makes it much more a diagram than a text. It's very, and the power is here, and this is the demonstration is here. Of course, I was a bit depressed because honestly, I didn't saw very new ways of representing information, and I came along your work, which I find very powerful and very new. For me, we invented a new way of representing information, especially flows. In that case, it's to let's say express correlation, but because you have not only correlation but also an interactive tool and also an in and out, inflow and outflow, for me it's very powerful, and for me it's a basis to expand your work and to find out. I think we can definitely use it in order to express part or aspect of a complex system. Thanks to you, and basically you gave me the solution. One, my understanding on what is going wrong today, or why the client are struggling with building a digital twin, is that the overall concept today is to start from the data, especially raw data, and generally past data, which means that you extract data from the past and somehow you try to transform it into information through data scientists. And because of that, you need tools to express raw data. So all of the focus of the research today, including the book of Tamara Menzner, is about that. It's about how to make somebody understand the information of raw data. So you need a complete catalog of representation, graphs, scatter plots, whatever. You will struggle with, or you will need the help of interaction. Interaction could help. Visual could help, type of visual could help, spatialization could help, and so on. And the idea is to somehow, once you have the information, then you are able to leverage the knowledge. In the real life, And I've seen that not only in industry today, but I was working with startup 10 years ago or 15 years ago. Startup in the realm of, it was big data at that time. They had the same problem, oh, give me your raw data and I will give you back knowledge. I will give you back value. It doesn't work. It never worked and it will never work. So we need to, or if it works, it's very, very, very hard. It's not, simple, easy, and you need very good data scientists, and you need very good, you need not only data scientists, you need everybody around the table to do that. And actually, we have a lot of clients, that comes to us and say, okay, I have a data lake, and I'm struggling to make value with this data lake. And for me, if we want to try, to solve that problem, if it is a problem, I'm a very, very radical person, and not radical in terms of I'm a very vehement. I'm also very vehement, but it's not radical in that regard. I don't know if you know the UQE, the researcher in technology, especially on China. You never heard of it? I will at the end I will show you. Maybe we can do it right now, actually, because maybe it can be. Honestly, maybe it will interest you. So it's how it's written. I would say maybe like that. No, China. He wrote some books.
Oh.
Is actually very, very very famous somehow, in the realm, of course, of technology and so on. Is very, very how I would say, is very smart, to put it simply. And he wrote books, and he's talking. There is one thing that I like about radicality. I was talking about radicality. Is that radicality is not about being, very, hard. Radicality is about finding the causes. Because radical is about cause etymologically. So I think that if you want to tackle that, if you want to tackle the fact that we came from the data and we try to go through information, we need to understand why. And for me, one of the reasons is that if we are thinking about rhetoric and the definition of it, interestingly, the definition of rhetoric changed between the Greek and the Romans. In democracy, so for the Greek, rhetoric was about goals and means. And goals and means is as simple as convincing an assembly. If you want to convince an assembly, because we are in democracy, we need to take collective decision. If we need to take collective decision, there is two things that we might use. First is the art of the means. Why are we taking this collective decision? Being able to express it and so on. And of course, so the goals, sorry, and the means are much more about how to convince and so on. So there is no good or bad means, the idea is to try to convince, and the key for that is to have clear goals. Interestingly, when the Roman became a republic, the rhetoric changed as a definition, and it changed in let's say distinction between form and content, because we didn't need to convince an assembly, because in a republic the leader takes decision, so there is no need anymore, to convince a group of people. This is not at all the subject, but we that still the rhetoric, so we change it through form and content. So form is much more about how to do anything, formalism, materialism, and on the other side, it was content. You see it, you know, in the design area, you see it, and I learned it because when I was, you know, a graphist, people gave me content, and my only work was to giving it a form. In no way I could change the content, which for me, which is a self-taught, it's a bit awkward because I don't see any difference between form and content. You know, there is of course, a relationship between the two. If you change the form, you change the content, and if you change the content, you change the form. It's completely logical. For me, this is because form is much more easy to tackle than content. We all, you know, all the Occident focused on content, on form, because it was much more easy. So it's clearly formalism. And if you think about that, it's completely logical. You know, this is why, okay, let's focus on the form. Let's focus on the how to give a form. And this is exactly that, to something that is unstructured, and somehow we may find the content. And I think it's one of the reasons. And interestingly, it's also linked to a collective, let's say, collective know-how. You know, we lose somehow a collective know-how. Another example is the invention of bureaucracy by Louis XIV, Louis XIV in France. You know, basically invented the democracy. Interestingly, he invented it by controlling the ambassadors that were talking from one nation to or one state to another state. And here, what I think interesting is that generally, when we are talking about, let's say, computer or information, we are talking about control. And here, another aspect of it is that you may basically control an entire system simply by understanding who is communicating to who. And in the case of France, you know, before Louis XIV, France was not exactly a state, and Louis XIV said of him, "I am the state." And interestingly, he built the state because inside France there was, let's say, kingdoms, if you want, but there was no real, you know, let's say, a global kingdom. And thanks to his view, you know, the bureaucracy, the organization of information, and so on, he was able to build basically the France as a state by controlling what a state was saying to another. Knowing that in that case, we are in closed system, you know, every kingdom was in a closed loop. And of course, a complete state is also by itself a closed loop. Other aspect on the why and the causalities, that even Shannon, which actually demonstrated that we could put in 0 and 1s every information, even him, and he said it, he didn't care about semantics. He didn't care about information or information quality. He only cares about information quantity and keeping the quantity of information. This is the theory of Shannon. This is why we were able to communicate. So again, here we are completely in the formalism. You know, we are in the form, we are in the quantity. At no point he didn't want to talk about quality, semantics. So at the end, we have something like that, you know, in the industry. Here it's much more the global process. If you want to, you know, to build a new factory or build a new system, this is somehow how you will do. you will have a first step, which is the conception phase, design phase, if you want, where you will take the best people you have, and then they will give information on the or instruction on every other steps. The next step is the commissioning. You will build, order the machine, build the factory, and so on. Then there is a new team that will come that will operate this factory. And at some point, we may imagine that we will try to optimize this factory. And at some point, another team will decommission. I'm kind of nice for the way it's done today, because in the reality, nobody thinks about decommissioning. No, nobody cares about that. This is very rare that in whatever industry, at the first stage, is taken into account the death, if you want, of the factory. And we see that there is a good example in Germany. For example, in Germany, they stopped their nuclear program. So they are actually decommissioning every nuclear facility. And basically what they are beginning to have is a know-how on how to decommission a nuclear facility. In France, for example, we have no idea on how decommissioning, we are, and for me, it's because we are too much afraid of death. So we cannot, project ourselves in our death, but in the depth of what we are doing, the end of what we are doing. The other aspect in it is that every let's say, step is completely siloed. Conception work in silo, commissioning work in silo, operation in silo, and so on. And for every step, you have problems. For every step, you need to tackle very, let's say, you have tremendous difficulties about make that work. And we see it, in Europe, we have a huge problem with battery factories because we are not able to produce good batteries. And we don't have the know-how. The Chinese have the know-how. And for me, it's completely logical. It takes a lot of times to put that in the real life, especially when you don't know well how to make things. So now that we have an idea on the why such a mistake, why we start from data and try to figure out information from the data, why we are stuck in the formalism. Let's try to reframe and let's time to look at what we have on the shelf in order to think differently, to use a quote of Steve Jobs. First, one thing that struck me once I read, your work or other, is the fact that generally everything is based on past data. We look at the past, we represent the past, we represent what has happened. But we don't take too much into account the power of representing the real time, what is actually happening. And I see it because I'm in a factory, this is so powerful to see it live. It changed a lot of things in terms of cognition, in terms of representation. So for me, it's kind of mandatory, to have a real-time representation if we want to achieve new representation. The other aspect of it, and this is an aspect that we find in the research paper, of why a diagram is sometimes worth 1,000 words, is the fact that there is a relationship with univocity and equivocity. Words and sentences are very, very equivocal. You can have a lot of interpretation of a sentence. Even though today, we have ChatGPT and so on, even though there is a lot of equivocity, and this is why hallucination for ChatGPT are not at all a bug. It's just completely logical. It's just because sentences are. There is equivocity in the language. It's normal. It's the nature of the language. And of course, the humanity is able to deal with that equivocity. But with design, with diagrams, we reduce that equivocity to univocity. It's much more precise. When you draw a map of, I don't remember if it's the United States or some state, a United States, it's very univoc. This is the United States. This is not another country. We cannot, of course, if you don't know anything about geography, okay. But here, it's very, very powerful. Very, very, very powerful. And we can link that also to the location-based relationship, like I said. So design, if properly used, is very powerful in that regard. Here, I've got a small video of Grace Hopper. I don't remember if I talked about that video, but it was very funny. During my research, I encountered a video from Grace Hopper. So you know who is Grace Hopper, right? Grace Hopper. She gave 2 conferences in 1992, tu vois, I think it was for the defense, Ministry of Defense. And because of that, it was under embargo. So the video has been released just this year. And she's talking about data, hardware, and software, and people. And what is quite funny, I think it's that. I think it's much more right here. Let me know if you hear.
At the same instant, in another part of the system comes the fact that Joe did 2 hours of overtime, which is the more valuable piece of information. And what are our criteria? I've mentioned 3 possible criteria: the time in which we have to act, the number of lives affected, the number of dollars affected. I think there's a 4th, the importance of that piece of information in making decisions. No work, no research has been done on the value of information. We've completely failed to look at it. And yet it's going to make a tremendous difference in how we run our computer systems of the future.
So for me, Grace said it. And she said in that conference, and you have the link, of course, into the presentation, she said that basically, normally computer scientists should care about only one thing, and this thing is information. And what she's saying here is that, and nobody cares about it. Nobody make any research about the value of information. We are in 1982, and I'm sure that today it's still the case, because it's very hard, It's as simple as that, but still it's the subject. And you may note, and I was, seeing it right now, that she's talking about decision aspect. And if you think about all the work of the researcher about, making decisions on software, this is the subject, this is your subject. This is the subject of Tamara. This is the subject of every researcher. The interesting thing is that decision it's about information. Decision is not about data or interaction. So it's very, very inspiring, I would say. It's still there. So now I look at another researcher. It's a French one. Unfortunately, I didn't find any translation for you, but it's very, very interesting. He was a cybernetician, but also a biologist, and he was completely, let's say, he continued the work of Norbert Wiener regarding, let's say, information science and cybernetics. And in one of his books, he gives something that may be very useful. He gives 3 types of information. First type is the circulating information. which is the kind of, let's say, cycle of information that you may have in servo mechanism. Typically PLCs. This is exactly what they are doing, or thermostat, if you want. It's a very, very, let's say, simple feedback loop. You see it. The information is circulating and regulating the system. There is the structural information, like, for example, the DNA. Thanks to the structural information, then you may have the structure, which may change, but it takes time to change. It doesn't change as fast as the circulating information. And at the end, you have a very, very interesting kind of information, which is the general information, which is actually the purpose of the entire system. Today, I think that we are not at this point, but when we are thinking about the global, let's say, challenge that we have, globally, like in the Occident or even at the species level, with the climate change and so on. What basically was Labor is saying is that if you're able to let's say, have a complete conscious of an entire system, this system somehow may take information from the outside through that general information. This general information is about the purpose of the system, and the metaphor is taking the metaphor of the body. At a body scale, we are a closed system, but open, of course, with our environment. And we are every organs, every cellule, every component of the body in terms of system takes decision about the purpose of the body, which in that case is to be in homeostasis, to be still alive, to make it simple. So the finality of the body is to let's say survive, if you want to make it very simple. But I think homeostatic state is much more interesting because it's much more complex than just survive. But every cell, from the cells to the system to the organs, takes decision on that. If you are in danger, for example, your body entirely, all the system will change their nature because they are aware in some way of that the purpose, which is the survival, is at stake. Interestingly, what he's saying is that we may map the different level of complexity, because here we are talking about level of complexity, map it to the social organization. He's giving a first map, but he's saying, he said that in the 70s or in the 80s. He's saying, okay, it's just a first draft. We may work on it. We can explore it. But it's very interesting. The molecule may be the individual, at the social level. The cellular level may be the social group. The organs may be the classes. He was not very, very Marxist, but he talked about classes, and he changed the definition of the classes in functional classes in terms of roles. In that regard, it's much more related to organs, and I think actually it works pretty well. We need different roles in a society. It's kind of a logic. We have a hierarchical organization, but at some point we could have a functional organization. And actually, in some organization, there are some try to make it more functional. And at another system, you have the nations, which what you call the systems, and at the global level, you have the species, and it may be the ultimate level. What is interesting here is that if we are thinking in terms of general information, that means that every component should be aware, not only aware, but take decision in order to maintain the global species in, let's say, equilibrium with its environment, and in that case, other species, the planet, and so on. So here it's interesting because for me, one of the things that we know that is that we don't telling people that we are destroying the environment won't change anything. Knowing doesn't change anything. Taking decision at his own scale in order to maintain the equilibrium is the solution. And for that, we need this general information and the circulation of information. My proposal is that we could use those same concepts to the factory, to the digital twin. So it could give us a way to tackle this complexity and to give, like I said, a definition of the complexity. The complexity is just a level of organization. This is a level of information. So so it's really close to the scale in geography, you know, and this is what we are talking. So we should talk about much more complexities and not complexity. Complexity is as simple as different levels of organization. So for example, the molecule could be a PLC, you know, and at the more cellular level, you could have an equipment or a machine. Upper, you could have a line of equipment. Upper, you could have a factory of a business unit. At the body level, you could have an industrial sector. But again, we could map, you know, completely differently. Of course, it's scaling pretty well because we have this concept of a level of organization. We could tackle every, let's say, part. So now my next step is it's about continue this research. So it was just the first step, you know, understanding, and thank you very much, Yalong, because you are very, very helpful for me to understand what was at stake. So the idea is not to start from data, but to start from information. And this is what we do in our project. You know, we do process design, and but we didn't know exactly why it was working and so on. So I got a better idea. So typically, we could use the same process as we use for operators, but for the global system. So let's start from information. It's a good starting point. Then we may think about, okay, what data do we need in order to build the knowledge and data and the computer system? Because of course we will need computer power in order to do that. We will need a lot of things, you know, to do that. But let's do it in that way. And then at some point we may have knowledge. And for me, let's say in the perfect world, what we could achieve with that, we could completely change how the information is distributed into companies. You remember my first schema, my first diagram. We could have exactly the same thing, you know. We could continue to work from conception to commission to operation to optimization. But we could add, at least as a starting point, evolution. And of course, we may have decommissioning. If we, you know, use that mapping, then we can have circular information. You remember circular information? If we begin to make circulating information between operation and optimization, then we could share those information that is structured, you know, because of course we have structural information. We can, because it's structured, we can share it to the other, let's say, part or step of the process. Because it's circulating, we can distribute to those parts. And then we can imagine that we could basically not only, let's say, solve the problems of digital twins per se, but also to help companies invent. Because if you have a complete abstraction of your process, you know, of your factory, then you're able to completely simulate new products based on the same assets. And we know that for sure, the the business today is about that. You know, the business is about inventing new products, whether they are more circular, whether they are more ecological or so on. But we will need to go faster, you know, in those simulation aspects. If we have a complete abstraction that is structured, we should be able to do that. And we should be able to help go way faster in the optimization of building factories, or building factories, and maybe decommissioning factories in that regard. For me, like I said, the idea would be to work on, let's say, different aspects. First aspect is, of course, information, being able to do what we are doing today, but in much more structured and, let's say, a formal way regarding and maybe more universal way. For example, maybe we could try to represent type of process, whether they are discrete, continuous. Maybe we could try to represent equipment as a process, not as equipment. If we want to achieve that, like I said, I think that we could actually invert what we are trying today. You know, today we are building things, and then we are trying to figure out what is the informational abstraction, if you want. But we could do the opposite. We could say, okay, I will, at the same time, or even before, I could build the abstraction, informal abstraction first. And then, because of that, I could represent it. And when I'm saying that, I'm talking about generative. You know, for example, we could take your work, and we could start from a state of a digital twin and project it. You know, instead of doing the opposite, we have the representation, and then we are trying to put data in it. We could do the opposite. We could say, okay, I've got something, and as soon as I have got something as a digital twin or informational abstraction, I will try to project it. It should, so in that sense, it should be generative. And of course, in that sense, it should be real time in that matter, but of course, in the matter of it should work. For me, it's completely mandatory to have always a real-time representation, you know, and that is generated. So in that regard, we could have accuracy, because if we do that, you know, at every point of time, every time you look at the system, because it's generative and real-time, you will trust that representation, because it's always real-time. You know, if there is a lack in the representation, it's not because you know, we didn't did the work. It's because it's not there. So we can trust that, you know, even though the data is not exactly the right one. And this is a huge problem, you know, I know it, you know, in the data realm. You know, if you are a data scientist, a lot of data scientists, you know, they come with figures to their boss or to their clients. And if the reality of the data doesn't match the perception of what they have today, of what people have today, they will say that the data are wrong. Generally, they are right. It is they don't, let's say, they are wrong on the reality. But because they don't have, they don't trust, you know, they don't, the representation of the data system and so on is not legible. People don't trust it, and then we are struck. So it's very, for me, it's mandatory. We should do that. We have some example as of today. For example, I talked about you know, how to implement AI in the real life for operators. Last week, I made this exact same conference in French for French people, and one of my good friends once told me, you know, he worked in the realm of industrial AI in the 80s, and there was a first try, you know, to integrate AI into industry. It was called the expert system. And I asked him why it failed. And, you know, if you ask to anybody today why the AI failed in the 80s, everybody will say that it was a lack of computer capabilities. And of course, it's wrong. No, it was not because we didn't had any power, you know. And actually, Grace Hopper is quite saying it well. You know, if you understand well technology, you don't have any problem in power. You know, because if you know computer systems, you always, you know, you will always find it. No, the real issue was, again, people didn't trust the system. So how to make it much more trustable in a way? So here you have an example of, you know, a typical, or let's say quite advanced, it should be typical. You know, every company in the world should have that kind of production tools. Unfortunately, just a fraction have it because, again, nobody gets what actually is going on with technology. But still, you know, here you have what we could propose to an operator of an equipment thanks to AI. Generally, when you set up an equipment, a machine, you set up set points. Very simply, you know, speed, that kind of parameters. What we could do there is that you could say, okay, you have a set point, you have an actual value, you know, and we could say, okay, thanks to AI, the AI is saying that you may change your set point to this new value. And basically, you have three possibilities. Or you reject it, you say, no, this is not a good recommendation, and you explain why. You could also say, yeah, I will change it a little bit, I will refine it, and I will explain why. And I could also acknowledge it, saying, okay, let's try. You know, I don't know, but because I'm not so, let's say, expert, we can try. It's a good example of, you know, begin to have a discussion with the model. Because at any point, AI is about giving the right solution. The AI it's about, let's say, statistically provide insight, you know, but in order to prove it, you must put it in production. Then the AI will again and again run and improve by definition. So it's much more a matter of a discussion than a matter of, you know, imposing something. So this is the first, you know, type of interaction of model that we could work on. Again, it's the start. This is what we are trying today. The other one is the 3D iconification, which is here we have a modeling of an equipment, but not in terms of physical equipment. This is a mixer. In terms of a process, you know, a mixer, it's always, it's about mixing. It's as simple as that. So we could think that at some point we could iconify process and equipment. And because we have a digital twin, we could project it. You know, it's where it becomes generative. And because it's real time, we could have the real data. So we could be able not to draw a digital twin, but to project a digital twin. You know, in a lot of ways, it could be very interesting. Here again, it's a first start. We tried isometric representation because it's quite industrial, or, you know, it's somehow engineered. It's very easy to modulate because, of course, a mixer might have several products, more, and so on. But still, it's a first start. It's a good start. Of course, we could use your invention, I would call it that way, in order to project, again, realities of digital twin, real-time data. And you said to me that it was completely feasible to change. You know, it's a map today, but we could use other objects, and I'm eager to test it in a certain context. So this is our first start. So now for me, the idea is to conduct a project in that direction. You know, it's not about as a classic design project designing a tool for operator, but now it's a matter of designing artifacts, visual artifacts, visual semantics that we will generate, that will plug on digital twin, and that will let's say make those representation readable of the complex system. And actually, we have a first client that is that agrees to work with us. It's the same client that asked me this question, and it's about water flow in a big water treatment factory. And the water flow and the piping is so complex that it's completely impossible to have an idea of what is going on, and especially what you could do with it. You have a lot of pipe, but you have no clue on the different scenario that we might have. You have no clue on if you turn that valve, what will exactly happen. What will be the consequence. So nobody is touching anything because it's work. So but it's not mastering complex equipment. It's just being a victim of that equipment. So we have a good let's say a first. So we have clients. Having a client meaning that and it's mandatory, we will have the data, the real-time data, because if not, this is not this is not the subject, and so on. So it was so it's good that the client was there also at the restitution, and actually he completely gets it, and said, okay, let's try that novel approach. Let's try that alternative approach, which actually is not novel, because like we say, like we saw, Norbert Wiener talked about it, Laborie talked about it, Grace Hopper also. So basically we are just doing what should have been done in the first place. So here is my presentation.
Thank you so much. That's very inspiring. I think there are a lot of highlights that I really think that's very powerful. Particularly, for example, you really talking about the challenging in abstracting information. I think that's actually a struggle that happens everywhere. It's a kind of like a impossible task to complete somehow. And I think like you proposed like a hierarchical structure that can potentially make the information in a more structured way. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I really also like the concept you're talking about, how we can actually using generative power in the final production, like in the representation part. And that actually kind of like a thinking like there are a lot of work going on, like a multi-agent generation regarding like the current AI power. I think that matches very well. What I envision probably that will be a very adaptive dashboard. Like the dashboard that we made nowadays are all kind of pre-made templates. They just adapt to a certain format of data. But like, what if we actually have an adaptable dashboard? It accepts any kind of data and show the best visualization for that data that accept at that exact time. That's really powerful, I think. And as you mentioned, that can increase the trust of the system, I guess. It's like they are not only do what they are defined to do, they can also handle unexpected things. So that's a system people will ask for. I think that's super powerful. I like it a lot. So yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. I think that's really helpful for me to understand what's going on. And unfortunately, I actually have a meeting that right after here, like in two minutes.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah. Thank you so much for your feedback. It's kind of you.
That's very powerful. And but if you need anything from me, feel free to let me know. I'm more than happy to help in any way I can. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I won't hesitate. And first thing that I will do is to share the different advancement that I have on the project, because honestly, I love your work also. So thank you very much. Thank you to you. It was so inspiring also for me. So definitely we should do things together, and I will keep you in touch. Definitely, and I will ask if I have a need. No problem.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye, Yalang. See you soon.